Good morning. This is Sunday the 21st, longest daylight of the year. They say is that today? First day of summer. And is that what it is? It means after today it's going to start getting darker earlier already. It just seemed like we got our full daylight back, but that's the way it works, huh? Yes, going down sooner, huh? You lose a minute or so a day, a couple minutes a day. But thank you to those who came out on Thursday night. We had a wonderful turnout, all hands on deck. We got all the bags done. Ran out of candy on a couple of them, so there's an individual that couldn't be here that wants to stuff some bags. So we have her stuff in the back for her to pick up this week. We'll add those to the collection. And everything looks like it's falling into place, as opposed to falling apart, I guess, huh? For the parade. Got just a few more things to get done. I don't know if you noticed on the way in, there's the big banners are on both sides that we're going to have on the float. The trailer has a gate ramp, typically, because a lot of times this is used for ATVs. So the ramp comes down and then folds back up. And so that's about, 4 feet high and 5 feet wide. And those banners are sized to go on the front of that and on the back of that. And then there'll be banners all the way around the trailer to skirt the trailer. And 60-some flags. It's kind of funny. I had a person look at the picture I'd sent out, and they say, "Oh, it's nice. We have all those different countries on our float." I said, "Oh no, those aren't countries. Those are states." I said, "Can you imagine the reaction if you had like a Chinese and a Russian flag on our float and 4th of July float?" It'd be like making a political statement. And so, but anyhow, it's good. Looking forward to the 4th of July. I guess, another 5 or 6 or 7 other counties went green on Friday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, joining Kane County. Now, Washington and Iron is not. It's still yellow. And there's some chatter about taking it back to orange. And one commissioner said we're not going back to orange. He says, we're not doing that again. So I think they got to get everybody together and talk about it, I guess. And you know what that means when you do that. So we are in Daniel. We got some handouts to give you today. So if you want to join us in Daniel, we're going to pick up in chapter number 7. Daniel 7. Interesting book. Probably when it comes to eschatology. And remember, eschatology essentially means... Yes, exactly. Study of the end times, the second coming of Christ. And by the way, we need to love the second coming of Christ. You say, why? Because if we do, the Bible specifically says that when we get our rewards in heaven, that we'll be given the crown of righteousness. It says it is given to those who love his appearing, his coming again. We need to love the second coming of Christ, anticipate it.
Jesus is coming again. Let's kill him again.
I saw that, yeah. Yeah, we get to kill him again. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the thing. And I'll share a letter we got in the mail here at the church in the morning service this week about somebody barking about us putting Bibles in the little libraries and how they've destroyed them and will continue to destroy them. And, the God of the power of the air, he's blinded minds, has absolutely deceived them. I know, we want to yearn for it. I talked to a lady last night, and we were picking up some chicken at Lynn's. And I don't know how I got in this discussion. I said, I says the worst can happen is we die, and that could be the best that happens, right? Because in fact, it's much better than here, so we want to stay here to get the job done, but when we're done doing the job, we go. And she said, I just love Earth a lot. I just want to stay here. And I didn't get much of a discussion with her, but if you don't have a good view and a good theology about heaven, you're going to think that you're in a cloud for the eternity with the harp, doing this and just floating around like with wings or something. But it's not. We've studied that, didn't we? We are going to be back on a renovated earth. and enjoy. Those things that you enjoy now that are good things, you'll be able to enjoy many of those, but in a much better way because you won't have fear that goes along with life now, and the enhancement, I think, to enjoy will be so much greater. So it's going to be good, huh? So we got to love the second coming of Christ. And when it comes to Old Testament books that talk about that, the two that we are studying or have studied, Ezekiel and Daniel, are probably two of the most prophetic books as far as looking at the end times in the Old Testament. So if you were going to just pick three books, it would be Revelation, Daniel, and Ezekiel that talk about that. Because he's writing to who? People that were going and are in captivity, Daniel is anyhow, and he's writing to them and he's wanting to give them hope about not only getting out of that captivity, which they did, but they were just made captive again, dominated again by Rome and whatnot, but about the end when the final ruler comes, Jesus Christ, and the righteous and just one. When you think about it, there's a big discussion about oppression. The oppressors, some people are oppressors, and some are the oppressed. And the Bible talks about we are created with this desire to dominate not another man, but rather what? The world, in a wise way, the animals and the oceans and whatnot, so we can reap the benefits, because they were made for us and for God's glory. But what we end up doing is dominating, call it oppression maybe, I don't necessarily like that word, but dominating other people. Cain did what? Dominated Abel to the point where he killed him. And that's been man's problem. It's filled with bad people trying to dominate others. I mean, the nation of Israel was where when they were in slavery? Egypt. Egypt had dominated them because the next king that followed was afraid that they would gain the domination. So he put them all in slavery, and God brought them out. Well, then they went through all those cycles when they were taking the promised land, all those cycles of going into being dominated and then brought out and dominated in Judges. And it's been that way, huh? So what's going to fix it? Nothing. There's always going to be that problem in this world. If we think that this political movement we see is going to fix things, it will tweak it. It will make it better for a while, but somebody will come along and dominate until the final Lord comes, capital L one, the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And then we'll find delight in him being our king. So, Daniel chapter 7. We didn't really get through all this through this whole chapter, but remember how it goes. Chapters 1 through 4 was basically covered Nebuchadnezzar. Chapters 5 and then 7 and 8 covered Belshazzar, which was Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. Chapters 6 and 9 covered Darius, and chapters 10, 11, and 12 covers Cyrus. So what we're looking at in 7 is back to Belshazzar. We looked at him in 5, skipped to Darius in chapter 6. Now we're going back to Belshazzar. This is the way that he gives it. And real quick to finish this, and we want to get to chapter 9 hopefully here. So Daniel's now given some visions starting in verse number 9. I think this is where we about left off. 7, 9. He's giving some visions, and particularly of God. Notice in verse 9, I beheld the thrones that were cast down. Now that's up in verse 4, Babylon. Verse 5, the Medo-Persian Empire. Verse 6, the Greek Empire. And then verse 7 talks about the fourth beast. You see that in verse 7 of chapter 7? And this fourth beast has 10 horns, and then a little horn will sprout up, and that is the Antichrist. That will be the final oppressor before Jesus comes back. That's yet to happen. But then in verse 9, and I beheld the thrones that were cast down, because who comes next is Jesus. And the Ancient of Days did set. Ancient of Days is another way to describe the eternalness of Jesus Christ, whose garment was white as snow. Does that sound familiar from some of the language of Revelation? And hair of his head was like pure wool. And his throne was as a fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. That all comes from Revelation chapter 1, that description of the Jesus that John saw when he wrote the book. A lot different than the one you buy in the store, huh? Which isn't really an image of Jesus. So David is in verses 15 through 28 of this chapter. Actually, I flipped too many pages here. 15 through 28 of this chapter is the interpretation that is given Daniel of who these beasts are and what's going to happen. Verse 21, for instance. I actually back up a little bit. Verse 17. These great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. So he's actually showing what that representation is. Verse 18, but the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Now, when does that happen? Revelation 19 talks about Jesus coming back. He says he'll come back with the armies of heaven. He's on a white horse. We're going to come back with him, and the battle of Armageddon is going to take place, and we are assured victory. We have the playbook. Well, actually, we have the record of the playbook because it's already been played in God's mind, yet to be played for us. Verse number 21, and I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came. That's the people during the tribulation that will be saved, will make war with the same horn. That horn is the Antichrist, the last half of the tribulation, 3.5 years. Until when? The Ancient of Days, that's the verse 18, the Most High, come, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. Then the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Verse 23, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, and shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it into pieces. Verse 25, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and to think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until the time and times and the dividing of times. But judgment shall set, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it unto the end. So there's really reviewing the tribulation here is what Daniel is. He's given a glimpse, a snapshot of it. And then in verse number 27, and the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. Snapshots of Revelation, isn't it? So, let's move on to chapter 8. Chapter 8, again, goes back to Belshazzar also, or stays at Belshazzar, 7 and 8. And this vision in chapter 8 comes 2 years after the first vision that Daniel had. And this is a vision of a ram with two horns in verses 3 and 4. 8:3, and then I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. And also he sees a vision of a male goat who's destroyed by the ram. So this is again the symbolization of the Antichrist taking over. And if we look at Revelation, and we look at Matthew chapter 24 and following, we'll see that the Antichrist at beginning doesn't look bad. That's why he's going to get away with it. He's going to win confidence. He's going to make a treaty that's going to be accepted by the Jewish people. And halfway through, and we'll see it in a chart I'm going to give you, halfway through, he's going to break the treaty. What's called the abominations of desolation shall come, and he'll desecrate the temple, and it will be horrible. That's when the worst of the judgments of God come, is in the second half of the tribulation. And so in verses 15 through 27 of this chapter, and again is the interpretation of that, which is a lot like what we saw in verse number 7 or chapter number 7? So we'll go to chapter 9 now, chapter 9. And chapter 9 goes back to Darius. He's the third king that followed Belshazzar. So this is addressed to, or happened during Darius' reign. It says in verse 1, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood. I got this vision. I understood by books the number of the years. Finally it dawned on Daniel, hey, this captivity is only 70 years. Where did he get that from? Where does it say? Whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. He read Jeremiah's prophecy. And he goes, oh, this captivity in winter is only 70 years. Now all this makes sense. Because there's going to be another 70 period come along. And we'll see it in a bit. That the verse goes on that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. Remember, they were paying 1 year for every Sabbath year they didn't give the land rest. Every 7 years you're supposed to give the land rest. They didn't. They abused it. So that's for 490 years that took place. So what's he do? He makes them spend a year in captivity for every 7 years, and the seventh year representing the rest, the Sabbath year they were supposed to give the land. Now what happens in chapter 9, the first two verses, he realizes exile only lasts 70 years. Verse 3 is Daniel's response. And what's he do? And I set my face unto the Lord God to seek by prayer and supplications with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. What does the fasting, sackcloth, and ashes, how does that play into that prayer? It's humility. Sackcloth and ashes was almost a mourning, one of sadness, one of lament as such. And he said, verse 4, and I prayed unto the Lord my God and made my confession and said, O Lord, the great and dreadful God, keeping the covenant and mercy to them that love him and to them that keep his commandments. Notice what he says in verse 5, we have sinned. He's telling God, we recognize all this is because of our sin. Verse 8, O Lord, to us belongeth confusion of face, and to our kings, and to our princes, and to our fathers, because we have sinned against thee. Verse 11, yea, all Israel hath transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Wherefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, because we have sinned. And then he's going to go in verse 16 and following. He's going to petition that God deliver Israel for the sake of God's own name. Notice what he says in verse 16. O Lord, according to all thy righteousness, I beseech thee, let thine anger and thy fury be turned away from thy city Jerusalem, thy holy mountain, because for our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers, Jerusalem and thy people are become a reproach to all that are about us. Now therefore, O our God, hear the prayer of thy servant and his supplications, and cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary that is desolate. For the Lord's sake, O my God, incline thy ear. Now that's an OMG, isn't it? You ever think about that? OMG? A lot of people have that today. But you think they're saying it in a prayer to God like that? No, aren't they? What a contrast. Oh my God, incline thy ear and hear. Open thy eyes and behold our desolations in the city which is called by thy name. For we do not present our supplications before thee for our righteousness, but for thy great mercies. Hear, O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hearken and do. Defer not for thy own sake. Oh my God, for thy city and thy people are called by thy name. God, don't do this for us because we're not worthy. Do it for your own reputation. Do it to glorify yourself. Honor your name. Now do we see again why God's name is so important and we don't take it in vain and we watch our words when we talk about God. What is that? The third commandment of the 10? Thou shalt not use the Lord's name in vain. God will not hold us guiltless who uses his name in vain. And how easy people do that today. So what happens in verse 20? David's going to get a response. He's been praying and fasting, and so verse 20. And while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of the people of Israel, that would take a while, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God. And yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel. There are 3 angels named in the Bible. Pop quiz. We know one here, Gabriel. Who's the other 2? Michael and Lucifer. Obviously, one of the 3 went bad. And by the way, 1/3 of the angels went with him, huh? And so he was speaking, and even Gabriel in verse 21, whom I seen in vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly. Now that tells us something about angels. Remember we were looking at those. While they're not omnipresent, they are quick. They can be in one place and another quite rapidly. He touched me about the time of the evening oblation or offering, and he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I'm now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of the supplications, the commandment came forth, and I came to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Remember, Daniel was one of those few people that there was no fault told about him. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. Now, watch verse 24. This is what we call the 70 weeks. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring forth an everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand, important to get this, that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, even, or unto rather, the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, not for himself, and the people of the prince shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation, which is the offerings, to cease. And for overspreading of abomination she shall make it desolate, until even until the consumption that the determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. So, what is that? Let me give you a thing here. I think this is, yeah. You can just, I guess, take one, pass around. Let me take one. Take one because I don't. This is basically 2 different charts of the same thing, but just presented 2 different ways. Now, we're not going to be able to cover all this today, but we will next week. This is 70 weeks. Now, the first thing we have to do to understand this is that the word week means 7. And we use it to mean 7 what? Days. But it can mean 7 of anything. In this case, it's a week of years, not a week of days. So every year of the 70 is 7 years. So 70 times 7 is 90. Yeah, 490. Now remember when they came to Jesus and asked, how often do I have to forgive my brother? Even until 7 times? And then I'm done with him? Now that would be us, wouldn't it? You know, like, you're going to do that again. No, he said, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. 490 times. Now, why would Jesus say that? Well, because if you're counting how many times you've forgiven them, so you have to remember it to get to 490, do you really think you're forgiving them? Obviously, probably not, huh? So what this is, and as you look at it, it takes a while to digest it, but we'll start to look at it and probably finish it next week. So along the very top of this, if you want to look at this side here first, I guess. So a lot of this is duplicate because, like I say, it's same thing. So you have Daniel's 4 kingdoms, and it tells you references to Daniel. A lot of Daniel references on here, huh? Tells you where those appear in chapter 2 and again in chapter 7, in which we just looked at 7, didn't we? And then you have Daniel's 70 weeks, and it tells you that's the 490. Now notice how the weeks are broken down in your Bible. In verse number 25, and this is chapter 9, verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Israel. Now that happened, if you look, I should show that on the screen, but I'm not prepared for it. Got out of practice. If you look here, at the very beginning, there was a command by Xerxes, the ruler at that time, to allow some people to go back and start rebuilding the temple. That's on the very edge of this. You can see that there. Daniel in Persian captivity receives the 70-week prophecy. And then you'll see over to the right of that, actually when I say right, if you hold it up like this, 440 BC, that was the decree of Xerxes, or Artaxerxes, how they say it, for the Jews to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. But prior to that, in 1516, you'll see where it says temple rebuilt. Some of them were allowed to go back and start rebuilding the temple. Remember, BC goes down. So you got 1516, and then you have in 444, the rest were allowed to return to restart rebuilding the city and rebuilding the wall and so forth to protect it. And you'll see in verse number 25 that from the command to restore, which is 444, the year 444, until the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, which makes how many? 69 weeks. 69 weeks. That would be how many years? It would be 483. Because remember, there's one final week that hasn't happened yet. It's still out there. So if you take 490 and divide that one final 7-year period, it's 483. And that should be what you get from adding in the 434 here and the 49 here. All right? So you have from 444 to 396, which is 7 or 69 weeks. You have the rebuilding of Jerusalem is completed in 396. Now, what happens in about 396 to the Bible? It goes silent. You know, remember we have 400 years of no word from God from the end of Malachi to the beginning of the Gospels there when John the Baptist came and then Jesus. So that's that silent period of time that they're just waiting. The Messiah is supposed to be coming. Then you'll see in 33 AD, you'll see, or shortly before, Messiah's advent, and there's an arrow pointing down. Messiah, Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, comes from heaven, the Son of God, and he becomes flesh and he dwells among us. That's in verse 24 and 25 of what we're looking at there. And then notice in verse number 26, and after 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off. That's his crucifixion. You'll see that in 33, the Messiah is cut off. He's crucified, he's buried, he raises again, and then after a number of days, he ascends to heaven. And where's he at now? On the right hand of the Father. And what's he doing right now? Making intercession for us. And he's our advocate. So every time the devil, which right now, day and night, is accusing the brethren, the saints, before God, and Jesus is our advocate. other words, he says, hey, the price has been paid. Their sins are forgiven. Their sins are covered, and they're justified. They're righteous people. So then you look in 70 A.D. 70 A.D., this is the people of the prince is to come. That's the Roman Empire. It's the Roman Empire that was in control at that point. They come in 70 A.D., and this is not recorded specifically because probably the only apostle left in 70 A.D. was either at the very end of the Apostle Paul or John. Because remember, he wrote the book of Revelation in 90 A.D. And then the book was sealed. The whole Bible was sealed. Nothing could be added to it. But look in 926 in the last part of it. So Messiah is cut off, but not for himself. Okay? And then the people of the prince shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. Now, what kind of flood are we talking about here? A flood of Roman soldiers. That's often used. If you were to look up chapter 11 and verse 10, it talks about there'll be a multitude of great forces that will come and overflow and pass through in verse 10 of chapter 11. Verse 22 of chapter 11, it's because this next chapters 10, 11, and 12 is just more detail on what's going to happen in the end. Verse 22, it talks about it. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overthrown before him and shall be broken. So in 70 A.D., Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and people began to think it was the end of the world. But what happened there, because remember, we got 69 weeks, 483 years accounted for from the time that they left captivity to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah was cut off, his death. Now, what happened when Jesus died? And then in Acts chapter 1 and 2, what was empowered there? It was in embryonic form during Jesus' ministry. But what was manifest? The church. The church. Become fully operational, robust, and started propagating the gospel. So you see that happen there. And what starts at that point is what we call a parenthesis of time, a prophecy, a pause, we could say. See, we look back on the Old Testament knowing what the church is, because we have the New. The Old Testament didn't know the concept of church at all. They had no idea there would be a church age. So what happens is the prophecy is paused, and there is a break between verse 26 and verse 27. So far, over a little over 2,000 years, called the church age. It's called the time of the Gentiles. Remember, Peter was to the Jews, but Paul gave up, kind of so to speak, in a way, and went on to the Gentiles so God could graft them in to the kingdom. And we don't know when, but in a moment, the church age is going to end. We are going to go to heaven. The dead in Christ shall rise first. The tribulation will start. And how long is that tribulation? How many years? 7 years. And how many weeks do we have left to fulfill the prophecy? 1 week of years, 7 years. And what happens halfway through that 7 years? We read that in verse number 27. So we'll pick up on that next week. Let me mark this so I remember where we kind of left off on this. And this will prepare us because Jesus is coming again. Maybe morning, maybe noon, maybe evening, or maybe soon. Remember the song? We're going to sing it again this morning. Because remember, why sing it again, preacher? Because we got to learn to love the second coming of Christ. It's called the blessed hope. Because I don't know about you, I don't want to be left out of that crown of righteousness. So, hey, thanks for joining us today on the live stream, or you who are watching it after the fact. Join us again in just a few minutes for the morning service at 10